It wasn't a rumor. It wasn't a headline. It was a sealed envelope and a single line of results that turned a royal exile story into a crisis. The Duke had demanded the truth in writing, thinking it would finally silence the palace. But the results didn't silence anything. They detonated everything. And when the Duchess read the page, her body gave out before her voice could. Because the numbers didn't just expose a secret, they exposed a design. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The test wasn't ordered out of curiosity. It was ordered out of pressure, legal pressure, family pressure, and the kind of quiet palace pressure that never leaves fingerprints. The Duke had been cornered for months by whispers that refused to die, by friendly calls that felt like warnings, by polite invitations that were really interrogations. He wanted something final, something undeniable. A private dinar test, handled discreetly, signed for, sealed, documented. In his mind, it would be the last nail in the coffin of doubt. Vindication in black and white, a weapon he could hold up to the palace and say, "Enough." But the moment the envelope arrived, the air changed. It was too formal, too clean. The kind of packaging used when people are afraid of contamination, either biological or reputational. He stared at it longer than he meant to, because his instincts were screaming the one thing his pride refused to admit: the palace doesn't fear rumors. It fears evidence. And if this envelope existed at all, it meant someone wanted the next move to be written, not spoken. The Duke tore it open, expecting relief. Instead, he felt confusion bloom into dread. The line of results didn't match the certainty he'd carried into the room. It didn't behave like a tidy answer. It behaved like a trap. Numbers that should have closed a story opened a new one. He read it twice, slower the second time, as if time could change what ink meant. His mind raced through every possibility: lab error, mislabeling, manipulation, because the alternative was unbearable, that the palace had been right to fear this moment, and he had just walked willingly into it. The Duchess reached for the page, trying to stay steady, trying to keep her breathing normal, trying to be the one who holds the room together like she always had. But as her eyes moved across the line, something inside her snapped. It wasn't theatrical. It wasn't performative. It was the body reacting before the mind could invent a lie to survive. Shock, betrayal, and fear collided at once, and she collapsed as if the floor had been pulled out from under her. The Duke surged forward, calling her name, but the sound of his voice felt distant, muffled by the sudden realization that this wasn't just a personal crisis. It was an engineered one. Because the numbers didn't just suggest a secret. They suggested intention. A design. The kind of design that only exists when multiple people have had time to arrange the story, protect the story, and weaponize the story if needed. The Duke's hands trembled as he realized the results were not merely information. They were leverage that could be used to isolate him, humiliate him, fracture his marriage, and discredit him in the same breath. His truth had become their instrument. That's when the third party appeared, the fixer. Not a friend, not a family member. A professional presence with the calm eyes of someone who doesn't feel emotion, because emotion is the messiest part of crisis. The fixer didn't ask what happened. They already knew something had happened. Their first words weren't comfort. They were containment. Phones off. No messages. No calls. No one leaves with paperwork. The Duke flinched at the authority in the tone, because it sounded disturbingly familiar, like the palace's voice, not theirs. Like a system sliding into place the instant the trigger was pulled. And the palace did what the palace always does. When truth threatens to become public, it went silent. Not shocked silence. Controlled silence. The kind that implies anticipation. As if this was always a scenario on someone's board, waiting for the day the Duke would force it into existence. That silence was louder than any denial. It told the Duke the institution had prepared for this outcome long before he ever demanded the truth in writing. Then he noticed something he hadn't seen at first, a handwritten note tucked behind the printed results. Not a letterhead. Not an official seal. Just a sentence in ink that felt like it was written for his eyes alone. You were never meant to see this. And once that note is read aloud, the real question stops being who the father is, and becomes who built the lie in the first place. Royal families don't survive by telling the whole truth. They survive by controlling which truth becomes official. The Duke's results don't just contradict a story, they collide with the palace's approved version of reality. And when bloodlines are involved, the palace doesn't respond like a family. It responds like a state. Because one altered record can protect a dynasty for decades until one test drags it into the light. That is the first lesson the Duke learns the moment the handwritten note is read. The palace isn't shocked. It's structured. It moves like an institution trained to treat truth as a substance that must be handled carefully, measured and stored in the right container. And suddenly the Duke understands the unspoken system that has always existed around him, official lineage versus confidential lineage. One truth for the world, polished and ceremonial. Another truth for the vault, used only when necessary, guarded by protocol. Passed between gatekeepers like a weapon that must never be dropped. The language that follows proves it. There are no tears, no emotional appeals, no family warmth. The palace responds with containment words that sound reasonable until you realize what they're designed to do: stability, continuity, reputational control. These words don't comfort, they compress. They force a crisis into a smaller shape so it can be carried without the public seeing it. A fixer says contain the paper. An advisor says control the narrative. A legal voice says limit exposure. And the Duke, hearing the chorus, realizes they are not reacting to his pain, they are managing his existence. Then the legal implications creep in like a cold tide. Titles, succession, inheritance, legitimacy. The Duke's private question becomes a national problem the moment the palace decides it is. He can feel the shift. The conversation is no longer about what the truth is, but about what the truth would do if it escaped. Who would lose? Who would gain? What would fracture? What would be questioned? The palace doesn't ask whether the Duke is okay. It asks whether the institution will be okay. And that is when he finally grasps something brutal: the monarchy can survive a broken heart far more easily than it can survive a broken record. As the Duke tries to steady himself, memories begin to rearrange. Past briefings, once delivered as guidance, once framed as care, now sound like grooming. The way people spoke around him, the careful phrases used to keep him calm, the warnings about unhelpful questions, the subtle pressure to avoid certain topics. At the time, it felt like protection. Now it feels like training him to accept the version of himself the palace needed him to be, training him to stop digging, training him to live inside a story that could be managed. And the Duchess, watching him spiral, begins to see her own role in the palace's architecture of blame. Her fear isn't only about what the test says, it's about what the palace will say when the test becomes public. Because the palace has an instinct older than the crown itself, when a bloodline story threatens to explode, it finds a scapegoat fast. The Duchess suspects she was set up to carry blame, not necessarily because she is guilty, but because she is convenient. She is the outsider, the disruptor, the easy headline, the one the public can be encouraged to judge while the institution stays clean. The Duke turns that suspicion over like glass in his hands because it fits too well. The handwriting note, the fixer, the silence, the instant shift to protocol. It all points to a palace that didn't merely hide a truth, it built a system around it. A system designed to survive exposure by redirecting it. A system designed to protect the dynasty even if it destroys the people caught inside the lie. And then a new phrase enters the room, spoken quietly by someone who shouldn't even know it exists. Not a tabloid phrase, not a rumor, A formal label. A reference to a file that sounds like it lives behind more than one locked door. Archive B restricted. The Duke hears it, and his stomach drops, because archives are where the palace keeps the stories it can't afford to tell. Restricted means the information inside doesn't belong to him, even if it's about him. And if there is an Archive B, then the Dina results were never the whole truth. They were the first crack in the wall. Because Archive B isn't about history, it's about the moment the palace decided who this Duke would be allowed to become. Her collapse isn't weakness. It's the body reacting before the mind can negotiate. Because in that single sheet of paper, the Duchess sees the future blame, ridicule, exile, and a narrative that paints her as the villain of a royal tragedy. The palace doesn't have to attack her directly. It only has to leak the right half-truth. And she knows it because she's lived inside a system that turns women into scapegoats when men in power need an exit. When she comes back to herself, the room feels sharper, colder, like every object has edges. The Duke is hovering, frantic, but her fear isn't only physical, it's strategic. She can already hear how the story would be told if the wrong people touch it first. A headline designed to ruin her forever. A leak framed as concern. A selective quote from the results that makes her look like deception itself. She fears the palace will weaponize the results publicly because the palace doesn't need full truth to destroy someone. It only needs a fragment placed at the right angle. And what hurts most is how familiar the pattern feels. Once, she believed there was a protector inside the palace, someone who understood the cruelty of that machine and quietly promised safety. Not love, not friendship, safety. A shield made of influence. But now that protector is gone, or silent, or no longer willing to risk themselves. The Duchess realizes she is standing in front of a storm with no roof. And storms like this don't just damage reputations, they break homes. The Duke's face changes as the shock inside him curdles into something more dangerous. Rage. Not clean anger, confused, wounded, searching for somewhere to land. His eyes keep flicking back to the paper, then to her, as if his mind is trying to force the world to make sense by choosing a villain. The marriage fractures in real time. Because when a man's identity is threatened, he doesn't only ask what happened. He asks who made me look foolish. And the palace knows that. The palace designs crises that turn couples into enemies while the institution stays untouched. She tries to speak, to explain, but explanations are fragile when fear is screaming louder. She suspects the test was manipulated or baited into being set up as a trigger, a trap disguised as closure. The way the envelope arrived, the way the palace went silent, the way the fixer moved like this outcome was expected. Nothing about it feels accidental anymore. It feels like choreography. And in the middle of that realization, she feels the brutal contrast of her life, the love story fantasy they sold themselves, freedom, truth, escape colliding with survival reality, where truth is controlled and escape is punished. The Duke doesn't hear nuance. Not yet. He hears threat. He hears humiliation. He hears the possibility that his entire life has been shaped by invisible hands. He thought the test would end the questions. Instead, it creates a new one he can't survive without answering, was my entire life curated? The Duke's rage isn't only at the Duchess. It's at the palace, at the courtiers, at the invisible hands that shaped his identity. Because if the results are real, then the palace didn't just hide a secret. It wrote a script, and he's been performing it since childhood. He storms into confrontation, demanding answers from advisors who respond with the coldest phrase, the monarchy has national interest. 2 words that turn a human being into a problem to be managed. He suspects blackmail or pressure was used on key witnesses years ago, because nothing this deep stays hidden without force or fear. And as he digs, he realizes something sickening: the palace benefits from his outsider image either way. If he's embraced, he proves unity. If he's exiled, He becomes the cautionary tale. Either outcome serves the machine. Back in the room, the marriage becomes a battlefield of suspicion and confession, of half-sentences and desperate eye contact. He threatens to go public, because public exposure feels like the only weapon he has left. But he's warned of consequences: legal, financial, reputational, personal. The palace doesn't have to stop him with violence. It stops him with gravity, with the weight of everything he could lose. And that is when the Duchess finally breaks through his rage, with one sentence that isn't defense, it's revelation. She whispers, barely audible, like she's saying it for herself as much as for him: "They wanted you to hate me." And that one sentence sends the Duke back through every memory, searching for the moment the palace planted the seed. Because someone out there didn't just know the truth, they saved it for the day it could destroy the palace. Every royal scandal has a face, but the real power is usually faceless. The Duke follows the trail and finds a broker, an operator who doesn't wear jewels, but controls who gets invited, who gets protected, and who gets sacrificed. The Dina results aren't the start of the scandal. They are the proof the broker's long game worked. And once that is understood, the Duke realizes he isn't fighting a family. He's fighting a machine. The broker doesn't sit on thrones. The broker sits behind them. The Duke starts noticing patterns that once looked like bad luck headlines that landed too perfectly. Friendships that cooled overnight. Invitations that vanished the moment certain conversations began. It wasn't random. It was curated. Someone shaped press narratives, relationships, and access like a sculptor shaping stone, chiseling away anything that didn't fit the approved story. And now, with the test results burning a hole through the palace's version of reality, the Duke sees the broker's fingerprints everywhere, not in ink, but in outcomes. The Duchess, still trembling with the aftershock of collapse, looks at the Duke like she's afraid of his eyes more than the palace itself. Because in her mind, the broker didn't just manage a scandal, the broker managed her. She believes she was introduced to play a role in containment, an outsider positioned perfectly to absorb blame if the bloodline story ever detonated. If the Duke became unstable, she could be called manipulative. If the palace needed a villain, she could be framed as the disruptive force who pushed him too far. And the most brutal part is how easily the public would accept it, because the broker understands that perception is a weapon sharper than truth. As the Duke digs, coordinated leaks from years earlier begin to feel like a breadcrumb trail, not accidents. A former aide, someone who once lived close enough to the truth to be dangerous, confirms what the Duke feared most: two versions of family records existed. One public-facing, clean, ceremonial. One confidential, restricted, controlled. The moral horror of it isn't just secrecy, it's the way the palace used people as tools, not family, moving them into place, arranging them for headlines, then discarding them when the narrative required a sacrifice. The Duke feels the floor drop beneath his identity, because if there were two versions of records, then there were two versions of him. Then the broker's name appears next to Archive B, and in that moment the Duke doesn't feel anger, he feels recognition. Recognition that this wasn't protected out of shame, it was protected out of strategy. A plan designed not only to survive the truth, but to weaponize it when necessary. A plan built with patience, because patience is what institutions use when they believe time belongs to them. And that name changes everything, because it suggests the lie wasn't protected out of fear, it was protected out of strategy. The palace doesn't respond with comfort, it responds with choreography. Statements are drafted, allies are briefed, friends are warned. The Duke and Duchess feel the walls closing in, not with violence but with procedure. Because the palace's greatest weapon isn't anger, it's legitimacy. And legitimacy can erase a person publicly while smiling politely. The Dina results become a live threat, and the palace begins treating the couple like a crisis, not kin. The first strike isn't a public attack, it's a reframing. The palace begins painting the couple as unstable to undermine credibility, not by shouting, but by letting trusted voices whisper concern into the right ears. Motives questioned, mental state hinted at, stress emphasized, paranoia suggested. It's a quiet assassination of reputation, cleaner than confrontation, because it makes the victim look like the problem. And once that idea spreads, every truth the Duke speaks can be dismissed as emotional noise. Then the legal levers appear like hidden blades: security funding, titles, access, NDAs. Nothing openly cruel, just pressure applied through official channels so it looks responsible. The Duke is offered a deal that sounds like protection and feels like captivity silence in exchange for safety. Keep it private, keep it contained, keep it dignified. The message beneath it is unmistakable: if you expose the palace will expose you first. And the Duchess, watching the machinery tighten, fears becoming the permanent scapegoat, the woman the public remembers, while the institution walks away untouched. The most terrifying move comes last, because it proves the palace isn't debating anymore. It's acting. The palace moves to obtain the test records, legally paperwork, permissions, quiet authority. Not to argue with them, to possess them, to control who sees them, how they're interpreted, whether they can be challenged, whether they can be buried. And the Duke realizes the war has shifted from truth to evidence, because in the palace, whoever holds the documents holds the reality. Because once the palace wants the documents, it's no longer trying to argue, it's trying to control the evidence. There's a moment in every scandal where truth stops being a virtue and becomes a weapon. The Duke stands at that moment now. Leak the results and destroy the palace's credibility, but destroy his own identity too. Stay silent and preserve stability, but live as a man built on a lie. The Duchess begs him to think of the children, the future, the cost. But the Duke is no longer thinking like a royal. He's thinking like a survivor. The argument doesn't feel like a couple fighting. It feels like two people trying to save different versions of the same life. The Duchess speaks in consequences: children who deserve peace, a future that still might be built if they don't burn everything down tonight. The Duke speaks in oxygen: he can't breathe inside a lie anymore, and every hour of silence feels like the palace tightening a rope around his throat. Protection versus exposure becomes the only language left between them, and every sentence lands like a threat, because both of them understand the palace is listening even when no one is in the room. A trusted ally warns them about manufactured counterleaks, not just retaliation, but pre-built narratives designed to detonate the moment the Duke goes public. The kind of stories that turn truth into a mess so noisy the public stops caring what's real. The allies' warning is blunt: the palace doesn't need to prove the Duke is lying. It only needs to make the world unsure. And uncertainty is how institutions survive scandals. They drown certainty in chaos until the public gets tired and moves on. Then the broker's shadow returns, colder and more direct. A message lands through channels that don't exist, officially clean enough to deny, sharp enough to terrify. If the Duke releases the results, a narrative will be released too, one that places the Duchess at the center of blame, not as a victim, as an architect. The Duke feels sick because he recognizes the pattern. It's the same pattern she warned him about from the beginning. When the palace needs an exit, it sacrifices a woman and calls it stability. The Duchess hears the threat, and her face goes still, because she knows exactly what that narrative would do. It would turn her into the permanent villain, while the institution walks away with its hands clean. The Duke prepares a public address anyway, because anger is simpler than fear. Words are drafted, rewritten, sharpened. He wants to speak like a man reclaiming his life, but every time he reaches the final sentence, he hesitates. Not because he lacks courage, but because courage doesn't protect children. Courage doesn't stop a palace machine. Courage doesn't guarantee the truth will land clean. The Duchess watches him and sees the war inside him: family safety on one side, personal truth on the other, and she realizes there may be no choice that doesn't leave scars. Then, the floor shifts again. A second test result appears different from the first. Not a small discrepancy, not a technical clarification. Different enough to change the entire meaning. Different enough to make both of them go silent at the same time, because the implication is horrifying. Either the first result was wrong, or the second was manipulated, or both were part of something larger. The Duke's rage drains into dread, because this contradiction doesn't just complicate the story, it rewires it. At first it looks like a personal catastrophe, one couple collapsing under one truth. But the final twist is bigger. The dinner result wasn't merely hidden. It was designed as a trigger, a switch to be flipped when the palace needed control. A scandal that could be activated to destroy credibility, redirect blame, and secure the dynasty's future. And now the Duke understands this wasn't about who he is, it was about who the palace needed him to be. Suddenly, the outsider narrative makes brutal sense. Multiple actors benefited from it. If the Duke remained the troubled exile, the institution looked stable. If he returned weakened. If he spoke out, he could be discredited as emotional. If he stayed quiet, he stayed contained. The Duchess realizes with a cold clarity that she was positioned as the perfect scapegoat, an outsider the public could be taught to distrust, a convenient lightning rod for a storm that began long before she arrived. And the Duke, staring at the conflicting results, sees the broker's endgame in full control the next era by controlling the story of the people who threaten it. That is why their decision now isn't merely personal. It's strategic warfare. They debate their options in a new language: legal strike, controlled release, or silence. A clean court battle that forces evidence into daylight. A carefully timed disclosure that limits counterleaks. Or silence that buys safety but costs identity. The palace braces for war, public and private, because once the couple understands the truth was used as a trigger, every palace move becomes suspicious. Every helpful offer becomes a trap. Then, in the final moment, the real Archive B file is opened. Not a rumor, not a whisper. A document kept out of reach until now. And what it contains doesn't just explain the past, it points forward. It names the next target, and that contradiction reveals the most terrifying possibility of all the truth itself may have been tampered with. Because once a dynasty uses bloodline as leverage, the story stops being about one couple and becomes about who the monarchy will sacrifice next. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.